Hi, my name is Ahmed, and I'm doing this presentation on gender and visual communication toward a feminist theory of design by Deborah Bosley. She has three main arguments throughout this paper. Number one, she argues that social constructionism is a feminist perspective. Number two, she argues the dominance of text over visuals needs to be eliminated and both used in a more balanced way. And finally, she argues that technical communicators need to be more subjective and take context into account more while they're writing. The goal of this paper, number one, was for the author to explore the feminist theory of design and how it relates to science and technology and how it can impact it. It was also the author attempts to incorporate feminist theory with visual design, which is an important component of technical communication. The author asks and answers questions throughout the paper, such as, is there a male bias in the rules of presenting information in visual design? I will explore these questions and answer them based on her perspective throughout this presentation. The author is trying to push for a feminist theory of design, like I've said before. This theory agrees with the constructive paradigm, which I'll explain shortly. This theory integrates visual and verbal language in a more balanced way so one doesn't over dominate the other in technical writing. And lastly, this theory takes context into account when creating visuals and texts. Social constructionists believe that science is a reflection of context and the person receiving the information. So, when creating texts and visuals, the characteristics of the person receiving the information are taken into account. So, this concept allows for a lot of subjectivity, which is why this concept is highly related to the feminist theory of design. But on the other hand, you have concepts such as logical positivism, which is the opposite of social constructionism. They strictly believe that information should be objectively presented. This is also the main method of presenting data and results in science and technology today. This method doesn't allow for subjectivity. They believe science should give descriptions of the real world, and the only way to do that is to avoid subjective or personal thoughts. Feminist theorists are trying to break down the so-called male-based biases in science. I just explained the idea of logical positivism. The problem feminists have with this concept is it's male driven and they believe there is no representation or impact on it by females. Another problem that they have with this concept is that it defines itself as the objective transfer of data, truth, and reality, and not by the general public or by other writers. Visual language is a major component of feminist theory of design. Technical writers agree on the fact that visual language is a better tool than other forms of language when presenting data. But the problem is they still don't use more visual language than they do other forms. So when we see papers and reports in science and technology, there's a lot more text than there are figures and tables and other visuals. So the feminist theory of design believes that there should be a balance between the visual and the other components of language. Deborah Bosley believes men are more likely to be individualistic and egocentric and separate, while women are more likely to be connected and communal. Since women view the world in such a manner, she believes they may have important insights about the current male driven method of technical communication, which stresses separateness and disconnectedness. She believes that if women create meaning through connectedness and men through individuation and distance, then they may perceive and visually represent the world in the same manner. Feminist theory believes what gender you are plays a role in how you represent reality. So, an experiment was conducted to test this theory, and participants were asked to analyze pictures for signs of achievement, which would represent individuation, and signs of affiliation, which would represent connectedness. Remember how feminist theory believes that men create meaning through individuation and women through connectedness. When each gender group analyzed certain pictures, the men projected more violence into situations of personal affiliation, while the women saw more violence in situations of achievement. So it was opposites. Men create meaning through individuation, as based on the feminist theory of design, so they projected more violence in situations of affiliation. Deborah Bosley ran her own experiment to answer the question. If perception differs based on how we construct our world, does the production of images differ as well? Men and women undergrad students were asked to create a visual which shows the 6 steps of a water purifying plant. And these were the different factors that were analyzed as possible indicators of gender influence. The results of the experiment showed that there was no significant differences between any of the previously mentioned factors that were analyzed between men and women. Results show that females weren't more verbal than males and they were not more aware of context, and they did not use verbal cues to aid readers any more than males did. So the hypothesis was refuted, and results show no difference between how men and women create visuals. So, in conclusion, um, feminist theory of design agrees with the social constructivist paradigm since it takes into account subjectivity of reader and writer. Um, the feminist theory of design would get rid of the idea that text is dominant over other forms of data, other forms of language, such as visual language. And it would allow for a more balanced use of visual and text. Finally, my question for all of you is, without allowing the results of the experiment conducted by the author to affect your opinion, did you agree with her views regarding masculism in technical communication and the need for a feminist theory of design? Thank you, and I hope you enjoyed this presentation.